They want the scrappy leader who can get in the weeds and not just sit in an ivory tower, be able to do the work, be strategic, and everything in between.
Welcome to the TroopHR podcast and to our first episode of Season 2, kicking off the year 2025. Happy New Year to you all. And in this episode, we're going to start this season the same way that we started Season 1, by asking individuals what they think will be some of the hot trends and things to look out for in 2025. For this episode, we've brought in Michelle Schreck, who is the Chief Talent Officer of Flatiron Search Partners. We asked Michelle to gaze into the crystal ball and share with us what she believes is in store for 2025. Perhaps her insights may make you question what you're using as your headline on your LinkedIn profile, or how your organization should be approaching people leadership investment in 2025. But there's a wide variety of topics that we go through. But before getting into the future, we must look at the past. I kick off the episode by asking Michelle, what were some of the main trends that she noticed from her vantage point in 2024?
If I think about from a talent perspective, I'm a chief talent officer at Flatiron Search Partners, so executive search is our bread and butter. We definitely saw an uptick in hiring, and I'll talk more about 2025 and what I foresee there. And from a hiring perspective at the executive level, folks do want that C-suite title, the COO, the CEO, that experience, but they really want more hands-on leadership experience. And what I mean by that is if budgets aren't super high, they want the scrappy leader who can get in the weeds and not just sit in an ivory tower, be able to do the work, be strategic, and everything in between. So with that, really taking risks on that high potential hire, the person who maybe isn't in a sitting COO role, but they're a VP of ops or an SVP of ops, and taking the risk on potential. So definitely saw that as a trend from a talent perspective this year.
It's almost like you've been in my recruiting meetings recently as we're hiring a director level candidate, and that's saying we need someone that can roll up their sleeve, but also know how to act at a strategic level.
Right.
In 2024, were there any trends that were a surprise to you?
Yeah. Honestly, we're a consumer-centric firm, and I'm a former chief people officer in the tech space in e-commerce, and typically used to seeing a lot of hiring from VC, PE-backed organizations on the tech side, right? Especially that post-COVID boom. But honestly, in 2024, the name of the game was consumer service-based hiring. So what I mean by that is private equity and venture capital-backed firms investing in med spas, fitness and wellness space. Pilates is a big space right now. Even trades like home restoration, pest control. Private equity firms are gobbling up some of those smaller home restoration companies or pest control companies, and then really trying to operationalize the business by hiring senior level executives to run a larger organization. So that was an interesting twist that feels very different from the post-COVID kind of 2021, 2022 talent boom in the tech space.
At the beginning of 2024, if I go back to that time frame, there was this concern that there was a slowdown on the horizon, and even recruiting teams were being laid off. Did that trend reverse in 2024, at least from your side of the market?
Yeah, I think it's a slow reversal. I think we're getting back. I think teams are starting to hire internal recruiters, hire back maybe what they let go. I wouldn't say there's growth, but it's getting back to stable grounds. But I still feel from an external search perspective, we are very busy because those internal teams are not in place. Again, depending on the industry, those consumer service-based industries definitely have well-staffed organizations. But on the tech side, I feel teams are so lean because of the mass layoffs over the past couple of years. So to answer your question, saw it right size a bit in certain industries, more consumer service-based, and hopefully it continues to improve in 2025.
Yes. This year, heading into 2025, there seems to be a much more bullish sentiment in the market than what I felt in the beginning of 2024.
Absolutely. I think everyone's excited. We're excited. We're busy. From my understanding, I'm pretty new to executive search. I've always been in-house operating side and people and culture. But from talking to my colleagues at Flatiron, traditionally November, December, it gets quiet because People are just going to wait till January when the budgets are officially approved. We have execs who are like, we're like, it's not officially approved. Like the board needs to approve. We'll know by January, but let's get started on this role. So we're busier than ever, which I think is a good problem and should be exciting for, our viewers and everyone out there.
We're in the same boat. We've been blitzscaling for months now, and I've never had such a busy period in my career than going through blitzscale mode. So good to hear that even in December, you all are having such active productivity during this period of time. So now is where in the episode I would add in some maybe fantasy music or something as we bring out the crystal ball. We look into what is 2025 going to be. And if you had to guess and provide your forecast, what do you think are some interesting trends in store for us this year in 2025?
Yeah, the biggest thing, and I think this is being a bit hopeful and knowing that the investment in this area, I've seen it work firsthand very successfully for businesses, the area being leadership development, which I think took a backseat through pandemic layoffs, especially on the tech side. It's just like bare minimum, what is needed, like in-house training, fine. But I do see this trend in investing more in leadership development. People are asking, even in the TroopHR network, like for executive coaches, for leadership development programs. And my opinion is if you invest in your leaders, even your people managers at the manager level, those folks touch everyone in the organization. So it's like the best investment you can make because it's a trickle down approach. If we take care of those folks, we give them the resources, the development, the training that sets them up for success, it will just automatically trickle into the organization. I think that leadership development is making a comeback. It's taken a back seat over the past couple of years. And in my opinion, again, best investment a CEO can make in their organization.
Agree. And I'll stay again. It's almost like you've been in some of my executive meetings where we're discussing these very topics. On that note, just for a moment though, executive leadership or leadership development making a comeback, have you noticed any differentiated trends with what is now being asked for compared to maybe what was being asked for 4 years ago?
Yeah, I think it's not just the executives. It's when I say leadership, I actually mean anyone who's a people manager.
Mm.
So I think leaders include your tier one level managers who maybe have a couple direct reports all the way up to CEO. There used to be a heavy investment on just that C-suite, but like taking a few steps down, VP, director, even manager, and focusing on all people management from a leadership perspective.
What, if I may ask, would be an other trend that you foresee for us this year?
I feel like I have to talk about AI because if we're not, and then my head's in the clouds. I'll admit, like I'm an elder millennial, so I was someone who was a bit resistant. My husband actually works in tech as well, and he's Michelle. You have to use it. If you're not, you're behind. So I think my opinion is it's not going to replace people and culture roles and departments where I've heard that come up before. Mainly because the word people is literally in our department, in our titles. I don't think it will replace. However, I do think that it will be used more heavily to make our jobs more efficient. I know from a recruiting perspective, at least, like I use MetaView for interviews and it takes notes for me. So I don't have to be multitasking, taking notes over here, trying to pay attention and be engaged with the candidate or even a kickoff call with a client. I can really, stay focused in the conversation, have that people, human, empathetic approach that is I think why people use folks and people and culture and search. So AI, if you're not on board, you got to get on board. It won't replace your job. It will make your job easier, and don't be scared of it.
I agree. Don't be scared of it. In my role, we are using AI every day. I work at an AI company, and I can confidently say that our HR team is at the forefront of AI use cases. And so I'd like to double click just out of curiosity and interest with you on this. So first, as a millennial, I'm nervous to hear what the definition of elder millennial is so that I'm just not even going to touch that one. But to ignore that for a moment and circle back to AI here, are there some use cases that you've seen that you found interesting beyond the note taking? And I agree. I really like the note taking use case.
Yeah, I know quite a few folks use it to help draft emails. I haven't used it for that yet. However, I think my recommendation would be like, if you're going to use it to draft emails, I just feel like it's pretty clear when it's ChatGPT versus Michelle. So like use it, especially if you have a lot of things going on, you're trying to be better about time management. use it as a first draft, but then go in and edit and make it your own and make it human. Yeah, I think for emails and Slack messages and all that kind of stuff that is a part of our day to day, it could be a helpful tool, but don't want to be like the end all be all tool.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, there are certain ways to customize that, but you bring up an interesting point that even I talk to folks about all the time is the concept of human in the loop. You still need to be there to customize it, put it in your voice. What I tell my HR business partners that use it every day is it should complement, not replace your voice. Hence a key component in all of that. Michelle, one interesting use case that I have developed a custom GPT for is, and this may come to a shock as many listeners, sometimes we work with folks that may be sensitive to any type of feedback or have strong opinions and may be really reactive. Again, I'm sure none of our listeners have ever worked with anyone like that in their career. But what's interesting is when I do have to deliver some messages, I do ask GPT or the customized one to, here's the message I want to send. How can you put this in a neutral way that doesn't elicit a reactive response? It's actually really helpful as almost a coach. If you phrase it this way, it may not get that response. So if you have anyone in your life that would benefit from that type of thing, I think it's really helpful with that.
I love that about like making feedback, which should be objective versus
Yes.
personal and subjective. So that's a really good example of a way for it to, yeah, work.
Yeah, yeah. It can save you from putting your foot in your mouth. I've learned that's also a good thing to have. Now, are you seeing we want folks that have AI experience come up from clients at this point?
Not yet, but that may be a 2026 trend or a midway
Right.
2025 trend. Yeah, I just think especially at that executive level, like it's not as relevant. Maybe different though if you're hiring for software engineers or product marketing or different individual contributor roles. Maybe it does come up a bit more. And just even reflecting a bit more on your question, Taylor, I think in addition, from a search perspective, like something we do use it for is like job profile, job spec
Good.
creation. And again, it's not to like copy paste, here you go, client. It's like a rough draft. And I use the word rough draft, first draft, like repeatedly. 'Cause it just helps, yeah, organize thoughts and responsibilities, qualifications, and a place for you to work off of versus that blank slate, white paper. You have no idea where to start.
Yeah, and so many folks are concerned about bias of AI. And the first use case that you talked about is a really important and a good task that it's replacing. It enables you to really listen.
Yep.
And instead of trying to multitask, I know, at least for me, when I try to multitask, my quality of work between those two tasks tend to go down. So being able to listen, engage, and then something in the background is doing that will hopefully get you better notes, which may mitigate some bias in the future. It sounds like you've already set up an invite to come back on the podcast in January 2026. So smoothly done, Michelle, smoothly done. Now, I'm sure we got some other trends. I'm going to keep pressing because you're getting these great trends out here. What's something else that we should be looking at in 2025?
Yeah. This feels very top of mind right now. Remote work.
Mhm.
Again, maybe industry specific. I think in tech, especially with software engineers, product, like you'll see more flexibility probably with remote work. But even in some of the tech companies that we're working for right now, like hybrid is the name of the game for 2025. I think ultimately we could argue like productivity, is it better at home or work? People are just craving people interaction. And more importantly than that, like relationships. And what we know about relationships, strong working relationships, is when you're in relationship with people, you have better work output. So I do listen, I love working from I'm at my house right now in my office. But when I even meet with clients, meet with candidates, or that Flatiron Search Partner team, we meet quarterly, like in person, it just rejuvenates you and creates this like instant connection that I think we've been missing for quite a few years. So hybrid is back at least 2 to 3 days a week in the office. I haven't seen a lot of 5 days required in the office, but definitely hybrid is making a comeback.
A lesson that I've learned in marriage, going on 10 years, is that sometimes there's things that I want to do, and then there's things that my wife wants to do. And
Right.
I'll leave it to the listeners to decide what ends up happening. But when it comes to return to work or return to office, there's certainly things that companies want to do.
Yep.
But what about candidates? How are candidates responding to maybe mandatory return to work? What's that look like?
Yeah. I think there's an openness to it, mainly because it hasn't been a candidate market for the past couple of years. So
Mm.
people are more open if they've been laid off and out of a job for 5 to 6 months, you're more open to it. I have seen an openness. Of course, you'll always get those candidates that are like, I 100% remote, that's it. But it's feeling like more and more rare, honestly.
We are a fully remote organization and we still do meetups. So it's not like we never meet in person with our colleagues,
Yeah.
but we have found that still to be, especially on the engineering side of the house, a really big differentiator for us in getting high quality talent because of the return to office. But I will say, I do miss some aspects of working in the office, but I feel that maybe it's one of those things where I had rose-colored memories in the past of what it used to be like, but I don't miss the commute.
And that's where it's the balance, right? I don't think it's 5 days a week, 9 to 6. I do think those days are over unless you're in like investment banking or an industry where they're not flexible. But generally in the consumer space, whether it's tech, consumer services, the businesses what we work with, there's that flexibility with the hybrid approach. I agree.
And if I may, coming back to one of the comments you mentioned, is it hasn't been a candidate's market in a
Yeah.
while. So what have you seen evolve since the flaming hot job market of 2020, 2021 to where it is now? What's evolved in that time?
Great question. So yeah, it was, I'll call it the mid 2020, probably till mid 2022 was when we all had influx of messages in our inboxes, too many jobs, like to know what to do with, getting high offers because you could and you can. And then I would say mid 2022 until honestly, let's say like this summer, mid 2024, it's absolutely been an employer's market. And there's been just a plethora of candidates on the market. Folks have been laid off who are looking for work. And with that, employers have the upper hand. I don't know if it's the election or what, but I did see this shift, just call it September, October, November as of most recent, where it doesn't feel like it's shifted back to a candidate market. It's somewhere in the middle, which I would argue is probably the hardest place for us to be in because there's a delicate balance of making sure that expectations are met from the candidate, from the client, being really clear on, okay, what are the outcomes? What's the timing that we want to get there? So I just feel like I'm in a lot more like fluid conversations and we're somewhere in the middle. So it's not quite at either end of the spectrum. I would say, yeah, somewhere in the middle right now.
And it seemed at that period of time where there was the hot candidate market that candidates were certainly being much more picky
Yep.
on making sure where they were going, where aligning to values or aspirations, those types of things. Has that evolved as well?
Yeah, I feel like that's still like critical for employees is like making sure that it's a mission driven organization. I think we've learned a lot over the past couple of years where folks have been laid off from companies where maybe they felt like that there was this baseline level of respect, like values. And at the end of the day, it's for profit business. It's about money and dollars, right? So I think even more so, it's like highlighted areas for employees and candidates out there. Like as much as I know you can't predict the future, you can still get laid off at a mission driven organization. I think having that values based organization that's really like leaning on purpose and who they are beyond just a job is something that employees really want and crave.
And from a values side, and not just on the candidate side, have you seen any evolution on the employer side of making more of an effort to relay what that is for their organization?
Yeah, it's funny. I like there's this old saying, it's there that when you think about values, there's what hangs on the wall and there's what happens down the hall, like what's in practice. And I feel like there was a time, like I call it 5 years ago, give or take, where CEO founders actually worked for one of them that didn't believe in the values because it felt like a poster that we put on the wall and like, how do you actually have them live and breathe? Maybe it's a COVID thing. Maybe it was the transition to remote work in COVID where you didn't have that culture every day in person where what happened down the halls literally happened down the halls because you were there with each other. And then with this shift to like 100% remote, I feel like founders and CEOs were grasping at like, how do we build remote culture? And there's been this shift into if you didn't have values, okay, let's create values. It can help us at least align on who we are, how we act, how we behave, helps guides even like internal programming, whether it's performance reviews or recognition. It helps communicate to our staff, but also to our customers, like what they can expect from us. So actually the past 3 companies I've been at, even at Flatiron most recently, I brought in a values consultant to help create company values for an organization. So that in itself should tell you that employers are looking for it. And I think it's, yeah, a no-brainer to help support culture, remote culture for sure, but just culture generally.
It's exceptionally important. One of the more trendy terminologies that I've seen out there, mainly in Silicon Valley and tech, is they're calling them operating principles now.
Yeah.
But it's still effectively the same thing. The other interesting piece that I'd find is when it comes to these operating principles, so many organizations are just basically copying one another because some of them are relevant to every organization.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
getting stuff done in time and doing
Right.
it high quality. So it is interesting to see that and know that's still a valuable piece of both sides of this equation between the employer and the employee. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask some of these questions of what advice that you had for your candidates and for the companies you work with. We'll first start with the companies. Companies come to you. We want to go out and get the best talent, right? And I'm sure that it's the best talent at the top dollar
Right.
is what they're going for. But when they come to you and say, here's what I'm looking for, what are some of the common feedback that you give to them of here's how you would refine your search, or here's maybe a more realistic approach to this?
Yeah. I think the number one thing we hear is they just want to see more and more candidates. Like, I want to see, even if you found someone who feels perfect, well, let me just compare to 2 or 3 more. I think honestly, advice at the highest level is if we can produce 5 to 7 like quality candidates, narrow that down to your top 3 from the first round interview and progress those 3 to the end, like you're golden, and know that we've scoured the market and we've done our job in like speaking to 50, 60 people. But yeah, if you're working with a search firm, like I would trust if you're going to receive 5 to 7 candidates, like those are the best of the best. Depending on the role, I'll speak to the chief people officer role or a VP of people role. Something that I guide CEOs on. You don't have to guide CPOs on it as much, but for CEOs is for HR, like industry doesn't actually matter. It sure, in some respect, like it's important. Is it exempt or non-exempt to employee population? And having experience there, I could argue is like helpful. But the essence of people and culture and what you want from a strategic people and culture leader, I would argue the best of the best can be transferable across industries. So instead of narrowing the pool, if we're talking about recruiting for a retail chief people officer, looking outside of retail will just open up the pool of candidates, especially if there's that hybrid expectation, which we're seeing more of. So how can we just expand that scope of candidate pool and looking past like industry specific? I think for the best leaders, like it's something you don't need to really harp on too much.
Some of my best hires have not come from the tech space.
Probably because they have this new, fresh perspective and they're not, yeah, I think it's new, fresh, diverse perspective is what's helpful there.
100%. And the addition to that is at times, any of our listeners in tech, I think will deeply appreciate this. Sometimes SaaS and tech can live in a little bit of a bubble that's not connected to reality. And getting someone with an outside perspective can be extremely valuable. So before we transition over to the employee side, final question on the corporate side with clients. What is one thing that you wish your clients would start doing and one thing that you'd suggest they stop doing?
Ooh, that's a good one. Stop requesting to speak to 10 to 20 candidates. Okay. And then start doing, I would say, follow the pace that we are setting. Like we're not doing it to just close a role. We're doing it because we're speaking to the candidate who now has 3 other options. And if we're telling you, listen, we're here to support and advise, you should meet with this person tomorrow because they have 3 final rounds in 2 days from now. And if we want to make an offer, I know you really love them, like we need to move. So just listening to your search partner, knowing they have your, at least at Flatiron Search Partners, we have your best interest in mind. And it's balancing that candidate client expectations. And it's not moving quickly and haphazardly, it's moving swiftly and thoroughly. So that's what I would start doing.
That is great advice. Twofold, right? Is when I led a talent acquisition team that drove me bananas. I just want to see this person's great. Just one more. And so we tried to pivot to what you've done, and I think is a great practice, is just batch interview. Here's the batch. If you don't have the first batch, we'll go on to a second batch. That's okay, but we can't really cross people over because they have a shelf life on the market. If high quality candidates always have options.
Of course.
So you want to make sure you take care of that. Now, over to the candidate side. And I'm sure there's all sorts of advice you would give, and we could probably sit here for hours. But what bubbles up top of mind for candidates?
Yeah, for candidates, I think the first thing was mine for me, like tapping your network. And I know that may sound insensitive, especially to folks who have been looking for jobs for years. No, I did. I messaged that person on LinkedIn 3 months ago. Be persistent. Like your network and the relationships that you have made throughout your career are like your most critical currency, I would say, in your career. Use your network, and especially those you've seen as mentors and leaders. And if they're silent or they don't respond, try again. Because I think that's the best way in order to get into a new organization, a company. We know applying for jobs, there's thousands of applicants. It's a black hole, unfortunately. And I hate to even say that out loud, but that is the reality. So if you know someone who knows someone, but utilize your network and your relationships, as relationships are key.
They absolutely are. I will be the first to say that my LinkedIn inbox is probably the worst way to get a hold of me. It's just, right. Even if my best friend were to message me, I don't even know if I'd see it for months. And that just because there's an absence of a response doesn't mean that person wouldn't if you reach out in the right medium. The other interesting piece that hits home right now is we just had an offer accepted on my team for someone that I worked with, I should say, 4 companies ago. And so you never know where paths will cross again. And now it's great to be working with someone on my team that I worked with in the past. So do exactly what Michelle said. Reach out, figure out, you never know what will come of it. Now, same question format to you on the employee side or the candidate side. Something to start, something to stop.
Yep. Let's see. For employee, I'll switch it up and do employees. Performance review season. Yeah, for it's early 2025, you're either in those conversations, you've just completed them. The advice I give is, while your job title and your job description can seem defining, step outside, and not at the risk of your health and your sanity, right? But step outside of your role and like show in action what you can do beyond your role. If you didn't get that promotion that you were looking for, or you feel like you've been in this manager role for 3 years, you're itching for senior manager or director, and you just like quite don't understand why you're not ready, show your leadership team in action what you're capable of doing. So don't be defined by your job description, by your job title. And I would say that's the way to be noticed, is action versus words. To stop doing, let's keep with employees. Please stop expecting career development from your companies, which is like a bold statement to say out loud, but it's wonderful when companies have robust learning and development programs. But what we know to be true is like budgets have been cut over the past few years, and it's not the L&D team, the training managers maybe don't exist in your organization anymore. And if your company is not giving that to you, stop expecting that. I know that's, again, hard to hear, but get it in different ways. So look outside your organization, look into different networking groups. I think about TroopHR and what that's even done for me and my leadership and development. So think outside the box when it comes to your own career development and your pathways. And I wouldn't expect your employer or your company to pave the way for your path into your career.
And the thing that Michelle said that certainly resonates twofold is don't let your title define you. That's a big one that I see, particularly with emerging level professionals, is you get hung up on that ladder, but also broaden your vision or broaden your scope of what you view as development. It isn't always what a LinkedIn learning module you completed. It's what exposure, what projects, what results you've done. And some of the most interesting things I've ever been a part of is when I raise my hand on a meeting and say, sure, I'll go volunteer for that project on an HR project, but I'll go help with it. And you learn so much about the business doing that. So I encourage all the listeners to take Michelle's advice there. 2 final questions for you. So I'm sure you've seen a handful, at least, of resumes and LinkedIn profiles. Any guidance of some things that you'd recommend some folks to focus on when developing those?
Yeah, so funny. I recently helped my father update his LinkedIn profile, and my friends ask me all the time, Michelle, can you just so one like very basic thing is I know sometimes people put in their subject lines right under their picture, right? Like a phrase or a word of who describing who they are. Just put what you do. And it could be like it doesn't be like HR director, but like HR professional at CPG companies. But just give us an understanding of what you do versus a quote or a description around personally what's exciting for you. So there's that. And then like, keeping it up to date. It sounds pretty basic, but I've noticed if I reach out to someone and then they respond back like, oh, I'm actually not even at that company anymore. I'm here. It's just keep your LinkedIn up to date. It takes just a couple seconds. It's gotten pretty savvy too, the tech and the platform. Even when you get promoted, like all that stuff really matters. Make sure the information is relevant and accurate and up to date so that when recruiters are scouring the market for certain roles, if you are doing something that's relevant and it's not on there, it's usually the place people are looking. Keep it up to date and then get rid of those like words and phrases that don't make it clear as to what you actually do.
That's really helpful advice. And even on engineers, I always find this interesting. They're definitely in a position where they can easily get jobs and they have the upper hand, but it's almost trendy sometimes to never update your LinkedIn. And
Cool.
I'm like, I get it. I get that you can go get a job, but you might be missing out on amazing leadership opportunities because people don't know that you're a director, you're a VP, whatever now. A little bit of time and then use ChatGPT to help you out, or at least give a base model if you're concerned on what to write. The final question for you, Michelle, likely the easiest. I at first want just a little bit of summary of what your organization does and how people can connect with you, both in your professional setting at your organization and then on LinkedIn.
Yeah. So Flatiron Search Partners is an executive search firm. We say executive, but we will work on director through CEO and board of director positions. So senior leadership at consumer-centric companies. So that could be brick and mortar, retail, fitness, wellness, health, med spa, et cetera. It also could be e-commerce. It could be consumer packaged goods. So consumer at the core of what we do across all different industries and all different roles. So operations, marketing, finance, HR, you name it. We have the team to support.
That's amazing. And if anyone wants to reach out to you on LinkedIn, how would they find you?
Yeah. So Michelle Schreck, you can just message me direct. Here we are. We're saying like, don't message. It'll go in my spam. I am in my LinkedIn messages a lot because of what I do. So you can just message me directly and I would love to connect and love to chat.
Yes. See, Michelle's calling me out here, which is what I love. And no, Michelle, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. I'll have to take you up on your invite that I should bring you back in January 2026.
Let's do it.
So we can see both how your trends panned out for 2025 and then hear about what's going on in 2026. But Michelle, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
It was so fun, Taylor.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the TroopHR podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to subscribe and leave a 5-star rating. If you would like to learn more about our community, please visit TroopHR.com. In the meantime, keep living the dream.